Hello, everyone, and welcome to ReadySetCyber, an ongoing deep dive into the issues and solutions in cybersecurity. I'm Rob Miller, a fractional CRO with 25 years of experience selling SaaS software and your host for today. One of the hottest topics in the news is the rise of insider threat for business. According to a recent Verizon report, the average external threat comprises about 200 million records, while incidents involving insider threat actors have resulted in the exposure of 1 billion records. That's a lot. Insider threat actors can be employees, contractors, business partners, and we're not just talking about criminal tactics. We're also talking about accidental insider threats stemming from human error. There have been some very high-profile incidents of this just recently. Perhaps we'll talk about them. Today, I'm joined by a panel of industry experts with varying perspectives on the subject. We're going to explore the rise of insider threat, not just of our enterprises, but also our national critical infrastructure. What is happening here? And what can we do as an organizational leaders, as a country, to mitigate risk and face these threats head on? We also want to hear from you. So if you're joining us live and have questions or comments, please type them into the chat and we'll address them. If you're watching this recording, you can reach out via the comment section and we'll be sure to get back to you. We have a great lineup today and a lot of ground to cover. So let's get started and meet our panelists. First up, coming live from Charlotte, North Carolina, Joshua Nicholson is an incident response leader at Surefire Cyber, a U.S. Marine Corps veteran and host of another podcast called Cybersecurity America. Welcome, Joshua.
Well, thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
From New York City, Tim Schnurr is risk advisor at LeaseTrust IT, which specializes in data protection and insider threat defense. Welcome, Tim.
Rob, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And last, but certainly not least, from the shores of Lake Tahoe, California, is CEO of Traitware, Heath Spencer. Heath is an expert in identity and access management. He's joining in the cyber fight to lower risk and simplify login for enterprises. Traitware is a single-step, passwordless, multi-factor authentication and single sign-on solution. Welcome, Heath.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
All right, let's get into some questions that I have for the panelists today. Let's start with Josh. Your work in incident response has brought you up close and personal with insider threats. What are you seeing that businesses should be concerned about most today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say is excessive access rights into applications and systems that aren't necessary to fulfill one's job. We do see just a real increase with insiders or either disgruntled employees, people are not making enough money or for one reason or another are coerced into doing different things. But we're seeing a lot of different move from your normal cybersecurity incident response type work more towards insider threats. So it's definitely an emerging problem.
Okay. Are there some real world cases you can talk about?
Yeah, there's actually a few. We've had, now I could go back to about 15 years ago where we were in a telecommunications company and it started back then. They thought the admin was checking the CEO's email, the CFO's email. He knew things he shouldn't have. So they had us put a keylogger onto his machine. Now back then you couldn't just change the cable out and put a inline keylogger. Actually, I had to install software. You had to reboot the computer. So we had to have a power outage in that wing. So that administrator didn't know that he lost power and it was part of this coordinated event. And that was the first event. And yes, we caught him checking the CEO's email, looking at everybody's payroll, abusing those access rights. And so insiders threats started from the beginning with me in my career. It's like, how do you protect the information? How do you ensure people have the right access to the right information? But you see that, and we see where we had one not too long ago where we had some actual nation state activity where there was a lot of interest in certain firms that either support the Department of Defense or their logistics or they move food for as part of the war effort in Ukraine. So you can see a lot of times where the insider risk can actually be brought to the surface more by some of these outside actors. So we're seeing some of those. For instance, this company specifically distributed a lot of different material, food, natural resources, and so forth. But they had an insider that was compromised and was paid off, and he opened up the firewall to a ransomware actor, and they had ransomware actor ransom the network, and he was part of that. Person was part of doing that and got paid for that. So you can see where if you're paid 100, maybe 125,000, you have some financial need, that you really need money, you could be susceptible to some of this. So, yeah.
Pretty scary, especially when you're talking about some critical needs and some very important work that's happening around the world. Also, Joshua, I know you're a regular podcast host, and I'm gonna have to ask you what kind of microphone and setup you have after this. I have to upgrade. All right, Tim, let's move on to you. What are some of the misconceptions about insider threats, and how do you go about setting the record straight?
So I think there's a real, there's a little bit of a divide, right? So there's two kinds of insider threats, and I wish there were different terms for them. Josh could probably agree with this. Like the negligent insider falls more along the lines of, I mean, in today's world with AI spoofing and things like that, is that really negligence, or is it, lack of controls, right? And then the malicious actors, which I think certainly we just heard about, right? Like in terms of espionage and really trying to infiltrate and get in there and steal things. Those certainly exist. My focus particularly is on, just employees leaving and taking things with them. And if you ask most business owners, like they'll have some employee that, walked out the door and took something, it doesn't have to be, R&D, right? Like it could be customer lists and, trade secrets, crown jewels, right? Like anything, right? Like, this conversation we had 20 minutes ago could have been, if I was an employee of yours, Rob, and we talked about something really important and I took that with me to another business and built a competing business, right? Like that would be, misappropriation of proprietary data. So right. I'm focused really on the big part of proprietary data protection. And not, like I said, I wish there was a different term for negligent and malicious, and maybe even like someone who's like sabotaging. I think you can kind of like put these into different camps, right? The intent's, certainly different. Negligent, malicious, like it's not even the same thing, right? It's like, so
exactly right. That distinction you had there is very important. So that's where a lot of the cases of the insider threat that I'm seeing are. It's someone moves from one company to the other. The nation state is the rare case. It's usually someone leaves and they want to further their business. It's either taking the sales list of the whales that came from that bank, and then I'm going to this new bank, and now I send all notifications out. I had over one company that actually produce microchips. One of the things is they had a new employee that was coming from a competitor, and they were afraid that person was taking intellectual property from the competitor. So it put them in a hugely dangerous position. So they bring out inside digital forensics people. Now, this all happened. I just recently started at Surefire. So this was in the past. And you could see where that was important from the company's perspective, because if that person did steal IP and then we go on to create a competing product, then they can always sue us and say that we illegally stole it. So the entire investment there can be soured because one person brought a document from a competitor over. And so we had some of those, like you would see one person is getting on SharePoint and they still had access to their old company, and you can see it actually sync between the two. And we could see where, well, that was a cover letter, that was a resume, it's no big deal. But these other things that is a big deal. So I completely what you're saying. It's the theft of intellectual property and the use of that in the furtherance of their career. So
yeah, so I'm taking that one step further. And Rob, like I'm trying to help startups. I'm looking at trade secret litigation and seeing how it plays out in court. And like they're basically telling you the steps and controls and prescription to, if I'm back in my shoes 5 years ago, what are some of the great things I could do to protect my intellectual property? I think in this conversation, we'll talk about some of the cyber tools, but there's certainly people, processes, and technology, right? Like there's policies and employee contracts and you got to have that all buttoned up, right? So you're in court 5 years from now, as Josh said, and you actually want to, you want to win, right? You want to have that IP. You either want to create deterrence or have the forensics afterwards if something bad happens, that you can, get retribution for that.
Certainly understood. And as someone who's worked most of his career with startups, I've seen an acceleration, frankly, of risk. So this problem's getting bigger, not smaller. All right, Keith, we got to get to you. In recent news, insider threat actors are infiltrating companies by getting hired as remote workers, stealing identities. They're gaining access to company valuables. How are they doing this? And how do we tackle identity?
Well, I think there's a few different things and that have already been mentioned, right? So Tim just talked about people, process, technology, and you got to look at all three of those. And then Josh already mentioned earlier, like it's about access to the right information to do that job. And, even inside of our own company, if we're hiring a person at a certain level that is going to touch certain systems, then there's different levels of background checks that they have to go through before we can hire them. And then it's just a matter of making sure that when you do hire that person, they only get provisioned to the things that they need to touch. And, so ZeroTrust frameworks through segmentation of, hey, you might be writing code for this mobile app, but you aren't going to touch the server. And we might have a different engineer that's writing code for the server, but you aren't going to touch the mobile app. And in doing things like that is how you can reduce that risk. That's been a centuries old ploy of like Trojan horse, right? So send this person in, or as Josh already mentioned, try to financially incentivize someone that's already working there, especially if they're remote and not in a building where they have someone looking over their shoulder as much, right? And where there's a lot of trust with remote workforce. And so how are you doing that? And the aspect of identity is moving to remote, right? We saw this really, exponentially expand during the pandemic, right? When people had to go work remote, is that identity became the new perimeter, right? It became very difficult to just keep your IP or data, the jewels of the company, as Tim just mentioned, behind a firewall on-prem, right? You had to allow people in and out from remote places, and kind of managing identity to do that became the critical control for that.
Very good. Thanks, Heath. Let's go back a step. Joshua, you were saying a few minutes ago, things about bad actors, how they're becoming more sophisticated, how they're coming in from various parts of the world, perhaps. And where are they getting this sophistication around these tools? How are these tools continuing to compromise these systems? And are traditional IT security measures like firewalls and endpoint detection, are they sufficient defense against these threats?
Yeah, that's right. A good question. So the tooling from the threat actor perspective, it became a real dark economy. So you have what's called initial access brokers, and these are guys that all their job is to steal your credentials, and then they sell it, because it used to be on the cybercrime used to take it, but I would steal somebody's social security. I'd take a payroll file. Now I have to find somebody to go sell it to. I have to ensure that it's real. They have to make sure it's not fake data. There's this whole trust process. That's why ransomware works so well. You just lock it up until somebody pays. But in a lot of these cases, the economy has grown just the same way we use SaaS and cloud and all that stuff. They do the same thing. There's dark infrastructure. They will rent out boxes that are in Colorado, for instance, EC2 instances, and they run a desktop there. Well, the reason why they can do that is it pops green for everywhere around. There is no security controls see that as a malicious host. So they're using regular technology from providers, and they're using a lot of other tool sets on the dark web where they just buy it. So if I'm a threat actor and I want to target oil and gas companies to extort them, for instance, and I want to figure out a way in, I can go into these darknet forums and ask for vulnerabilities. I can look for those. There's a whole side of this called OSINT, which is open source intelligence, where you can see domain registration. I can go to hunt.io and I can see what domains are in there, whether some of the email addresses that get scraped from different websites for that organization. Well, now I could just target them with phishing attacks. And so there's a lot of this commercialization that's happening where the threat actor groups get into a niche. They get into a certain, I normally send a phishing email, I drop some malware, I do this. The thing is working for me. I have a pattern for me. And so now it's just like businesses where we use third parties and SaaS apps, and they do the same thing. So a lot of the threat actors are not technical. They just buy those technical services from other people, and then they put it together. Same way I want to rent a botnet to do an attack. I would just rent one out for an hour or two, and now you have access to 1,000 different hosts that you could do something with for that time.
So a quick follow on, how do we counteract this threat? Is there a different approach? Is there something more that the companies should be doing that they're not doing today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a lot less abuse reporting. Like when we have attacks that happen, we don't report it to the government. We don't do any of that stuff. I mean, so all these free abuse reporting things, there's really not a lot of things being pushed to it. And then, so it's hard to tell what is going on in some of these areas. I think there is some regulatory enforcement, because I think some of these businesses know that it's malicious activity. They're in line. They completely know it's happening. So it's a difficult problem. And I think they really had it from a funds perspective. They could see where cash went and dollars went. But now with Bitcoin, made it a lot more anonymous. But now they've pretty much tracked you down to your wallet, so you can be tracked down to your wallet. And so threat actors are having to tumble their Bitcoin the same way you tumble money or you launder money. You have to get different Bitcoin when you have transactions. So it's morphing into the same kind of technology economy we do here on the regular.
Understood. All right. The threats are changing. The defenses are changing. It's a constantly moving target. All right. I've got to get around to what is probably my favorite question of the day. So no pressure, Tim. Zero trust is not a well-liked term, according to surveys. What does it mean? Why is it important? How can we help companies build like a strong security posture without creating a culture of distrust, which frankly, the term zero trust kind of brings up right out of the gate?
Yeah, the name of my company as well. I mean, it's pretty similar, right? So I didn't know it was getting that bad a rap on the street, zero trust, but certainly I think everyone understands the idea, or like a need to know basis, right? Putting data almost in silos or sharding it or out into like different areas. It certainly builds resilience. If any of you, I think Josh has, right? Certainly worked at a federal agency or a bank. You understand that you get the limited amount of access and you get a limited amount of tools, right? You get need to know access and just amount of like software or what to do your job, right? And so that reduces attack surface area for attackers dramatically. There's less to protect. You've got an 8x8 cell as opposed to a giant castle. So it's I think anyone who works at a company should understand the importance of resilience, the importance of cybersecurity. So from a cultural perspective, that's probably a little bit of a rabbit hole. I work with organizations. I give some trainings on, balancing innovation and cybersecurity. Like, unfortunately, cybersecurity is quite frictionless. It's usually the opposite of an innovative, sandbox, right? Like, they call, a CISO Dr. No, right? Like, can I use this application? No. Can I have access to this data? No, right? Yeah. Culturally, like, how do you balance that? The need for cybersecurity, but at the same time, like, create the, incentives and ability to do your job. And that's, like I said, that's probably a longer conversation in terms of cultivating IP, right? And at the same time protecting it. You see it at, some of the, West Coast organizations that are really good at this, right? Like incentives for patent and incentives for trade secrets, right?
Right.
So, I think
or a culture that allows, 5% time or more, right? Where you can be experimental.
Right. The Google, whatever, was it 5% or I thought it was even more than that.
Don't remember.
Yeah.
It's fluctuated.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and one other point I wanted to come back to,
please.
We're on the topic of insider threat. Josh just mentioned there's not a lot of reporting out there. Mm-hmm. Insider threat, certainly when it comes to trade secrets, corporate proprietary data misappropriation, most companies don't report that, right? So like, I think the losses, I have no idea what they are. It's a big number. I don't know how big the number are. There's not a regulatory requirement. Most of the time, you spill privacy data, yeah, you're in trouble, right? Like, someone breaches you and accesses PII or PCI or whatever, you're in trouble. But if you got an employee that walks out the door and takes proprietary data, not a lot of regulators, like, that's not their mission, right? They're not out there to, that's your fault, right? So I think a lot of times it does get swept under the true size of how big of a problem this is and the actual damages globally it's a big number. It's, like I said, wildly unreported, because there's no, I don't, most of the time cyber insurance isn't going to cover this, right? Like, Josh, maybe you can say I'm wrong here, but it's just not reported. It's not under cyber insurance scope. So just, coming back to that, I think that's something I think people could walk away with this and think about, like, wow, it really is a big number, and it's wildly unreported. So,
and some of insider stuff is covered by insurance a lot of times. What's interesting, we've been on a few of them here that you have legal representation, you're under counsel, the whole 9 yards. So it's locked up like it would be any HR type investigation, right? I think one of the biggest controls for insider threat, when you look at everything out there, EDR, IDS, IPS, what is the biggest thing can you start off with? It's just being able to have a really strong logging solution. Because if you can't tell what's happening, that someone did log on and they did do this transaction, if you can't even get to the basics of what happened, I cannot magically reproduce what happened and who's guilty of it. So I think having a strong logging solution, having a SIM where those logs come off, they're not rotated every 30 days, because sometimes these insider threat things go back 6 months. Now, I only got 30 days, 60 days worth of data that's in the SIM potentially. And you're talking about activity of moving data 6 months ago. How am I going to get back to it? So you can see where I think a logging solution, because once you know about it, then you can start putting controls to stop it or do something about it and say you shouldn't have access to that data and so forth. But if you're not logging it in the first place, you'll never know what's happened until after the breach. Does that make sense?
It does. I think you guys just actually opened up a topic for a future ReadySetCyber. So thank you for that. It makes my job a little bit easier. And Tim, respect to you. Oh, sorry, Heath, go ahead.
I was going to say, just follow on to that, which I think leads into where the conversation might be going anyway, is with logging and attribution. So if you look at regulatory requirements or cyber insurance requirements these days and where they're moving, a lot of people don't read the fine print of something like the FTC safeguards rule that recently implemented. MFA has to be a requirement if you are collecting any non-public PII. But further down in the paragraphs of that regulation, it requires essentially centralized identity management, because you have to have logging, as Josh just mentioned, and attribution of which user took the action, right, to access this system, whether it was an endpoint, an application, or whatever it was. That's part of the FTC safeguards rule that's in there. So when you look at logging and attribution, it's not just your total SIM of like what's happening on the endpoints or the server or whatever else, but you also need it for your access control of where the human needs to access the endpoint or the application to be able to deliver attribution. If you take that a step further out, this is where companies have to move to phishing resistant MFA, and in other terms, unshareable secrets, right? So employees will always have the mindset, if the secret, your password or your OTP, is shareable, they will always lean towards a plausible deniability of like, well, someone must have compromised my shareable secret, and think that they can get away with it because someone borrowed or took my login. Well, if you remove that capability and you implement a system that biometrically ties them to that attribution with behavioral biometrics or other things, and literally says you can no longer share because the factors of authenticating you are transparent to you, that access, you remove that plausible deniability of saying you did this action.
It's a great point, Heath. Actually, and following on that, what is the difference between what you're just discussing now, which is ditching the password. It's passwordless. What's the difference between that and a passkey, particularly in the enterprise environment?
Well, passkeys are a step forward in some aspects. However, passkeys in various uses and in some instances remain shareable or storable across multiple devices and are not bound to a single device, which makes them shareable. If the passkey is shareable, it's a shareable secret, and it's not truly phishing resistant MFA. It might be tied to certain devices or whatever, but so as an example, if I have a password on the device or a PIN, like my phone PIN, to unlock my phone, or just a password to unlock my endpoint, and I have no other protections on that, and I can then launch my passkey from the browser, it's still shareable and anyone could use it.
Sure.
So from an enterprise point, that doesn't work. I think they definitely help in some consumer applications. I think the goal is to move towards something that is like a passkey experience for the user to reduce friction, but you still need to be able to implement centralized identity management. And again, if the passkeys are shareable or storable on multiple devices, creating that logging and attribution, as Josh mentioned, becomes more difficult. So I think you still got to work within something that was built specifically for workforce identity when you're addressing workforce identity. And as a consumer, passkeys are definitely great. Look, we are FIDO members. We support everything that's moving that direction. I think there's some things to be still evolved and worked out, but excited to see that direction moving forward. I think the other vulnerability with passkeys is most of those systems are asking people to convert to a passkey after the account was created, which means there was a password at the account creation, and most likely the password is the recovery method, which means the password still exists. And if the password still exists, the weak link or the way the threat actor is going to take the account over is with the recovery method.
Understood. Yeah. All right. I do want to keep us moving. And before I go to this next question, which is kind of a doozy, I just wanted to come back to the ZeroTrust topic real quick. Tim, props to you for calling your company Least Trust. At least it's not zero. There's not a lot of trust.
Yeah.
I sort of feel like we should call it, like not much trust, but there's still many mechanisms to verify. We're not necessarily in a zero.
I think it's a bad term. It's a really bad term. I did a podcast saying zero trust in the Middle East, and they're like, "What? You hate people in the Middle East?"
Right, exactly.
No, it's no trust. Zero trust is a framework. So it depends on who hears that, right? An HR person will be, "We trust all our people." What do you mean? We have zero trust in our people? That's not what we're talking about. This is a system context, right? So yeah.
All right. Well, any marketer that might be watching this today accidentally or on purpose, please send us ideas for an upgrade to this term. Okay, let's move on. Look, we can't talk about any issue today without bringing up artificial intelligence. What is the role of AI in insider threat? And this is a question for any one of you to take on. How are attackers utilizing it to the degree that they're at that point?
I'd say artificial intelligence is no match for natural stupidity. So they're still balancing each other out. So I there's a lot of.
Josh just froze. The AI didn't want to hear his
I was going to
response.
say the AI. Oh, there he is.
Okay. So you're seeing AI enter the enterprise in several applications and systems right now. You can see we're having guardrails and a model.
Yeah, the AI is back at it again, Josh.
Yeah. I'd say one thing before we jump. I work with businesses AI readiness, right? So I don't think anyone's ready for AI from a security perspective, right? Like you're certainly using AI where you're training like open models or you're leaking data, but also there's other problems in terms of classifying your data first, right? Like in terms of what is private, what is public, what is proprietary. Certainly having all those ducks in a row are really important before you start to use some of these AI models that, what are they really good? They're really good at search. They're really good at finding things in an organization that you didn't know were there. They used to talk about data by obscurity. Like, you just, oh, that's a valuable piece of data, but no one knows where it is. And then the other thing is inference, right? Like, so the ability to put two things together and say, and anyone from like the investment world knows the term mosaic theory. It's like, basically you take two pieces of non-public, non-material information, you turn into a non-public material information, right? Insider threat, or not, sorry, insider trading. But it's the same thing when you think about pieces of data in an organization. Like, it can infer things, and it can pull proprietary data from what you might classify as non-proprietary. So AI is a whole juggernaut. People being ready for it. Yeah, I think we're already behind in the security game. AI is just going to exaggerate your weaknesses and your gaps. So.
Right. All right. Well, before we come to the follow-up to that point, Josh, I know you're back. Thank you for that. Choose your words carefully, because the AI is listening, apparently. So
it is listening. So I'm glad. I think there's a lot of different kind of things that are moving forward with cybersecurity, especially from a data leak perspective. People are putting sensitive information. They're not getting around that. How is that going to be used? I see people putting social security numbers in documents that they want to write to the government, throwing in ChatGPT. So you ask yourself, where is that data going to end up?
Oh no! As soon as he starts talking, it's gone.
Maybe give him another second. I think he's gonna get kicked out again. All right. Well, look, Josh, you there?
That's right. He's back. It's okay.
So I'm just thinking from an AI perspective, there when it starts making business decisions, that's when the rubber's going to meet the road. We need to get in with the application owners to go.
Yep. I actually put something in the chat. There's a little bit of there's a StreamYard secret or hack.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway.
Well, just keep going. I'll be the listening and adding my comments as it goes. So
that's all right.
Well, you were saying something about business ramifications. Josh, do you want to continue now, or try this patch quick and then come back to it? Yeah, I think we're going to do that. Heath, anything that you want to add to this topic?
Well, yeah, I mean, we addressed it already, right? Like, so using, there's two different parts of the AI part, right? Or there's multiple facets, and as Tim mentioned, I think we're behind it. I think one of the critical first things is no one reads terms of service, right? And I think when you look at AI, and I think it leads into another topic called shadow SaaS, right? You've got employees that are using things that you don't know they're using, and they definitely didn't read the terms of service. They start using some AI tool to help them do their job more efficiently, and little beknownst the terms of service of that system are gathering everything that was on their endpoint and then taking it potentially offshore, wherever else. So I think companies are really going to have to highly consider how AI is being used. It goes back to company culture, awareness, training around those things, but then also setting access controls and policies of like, hey, if you're on a system that's touching a production environment, you can't use this AI unless you're hosting it yourselves and you're in control of the modeling and the LLM, right? And so there's those aspects. Then there's the aspects of AI in cybersecurity where we are seeing incredibly already the video and voice fakes that are coming in, and already on Zoom calls and whatever else, you're going to start facing like, hey, this person got impersonated on a board call and passed this motion, right? So how are you going to deliver a certain level of assurance that it was this person that actually placed this vote during this meeting, right?
Right.
That's a different aspect of insider threat with what AI is doing today, and delivering identity assurance during those types of meetings. Then you want to go back to this least favorite term, all right? Least privilege, least zero trust, right? With AI, we've already seen attorneys get in trouble for using AI in a court case, and it completely made up the data, right? So it took data references from other cases and then produced something. Tim's word was inferred that these things were real. And so how are you actually going to trust the source of where the AI model pulled that data from, right?
Mhm.
And just didn't fabricate it. So I think there's going to need to be some sort of data assurance level in the AI modeling that you're using. And I think those are a lot of problems to solve out there.
Yeah. So we're back to this kind of trust but verify idea. I mean, how can we may be looking a bit far in the future, but maybe you guys in your travels have seen glimpses of this. How can organizations use AI to fight AI? Essentially, are there things that are starting to show up on the market? I don't know if you want to name anything specifically, but I mean, are these things coming?
There's a good use case here. So it's really easy to classify. It's for data classification tools, right? So there's social security numbers, they're 9 digits, eight digits, something like that. Credit card numbers are pretty obvious, right? So like the ability to classify privacy data is very, it's very good at that. It uses regex, and it's able to basically put a bunch of data off to the side and say, like, you need to protect this, make sure ZeroTrust is enabled, using traitware to protect that, right? And then there's proprietary data, which is very difficult to know that that data is valuable. And I am seeing some AI solutions out there that are, either browser based or, kind of an overlay. So an example would be, I'm sending something out in an email. It'll read through the contents of the email and say, are you sure you want to do this? This looks proprietary. Right. So it's using an AI engine. So I think AI will be very helpful there. It's like I said, it's very hard to kind of humanly classify everything and put it in a bucket. So you're going to need some kind of, I don't want to use the word AI, but some kind of tool to scale that defense. So I think that's very helpful, right? Because like just by doing data classification, which is a huge step for certainly trade secret protection, but also kind of like risk management 101. Like where do I concentrate my efforts? So
yeah. Tim,
well, I
love
think
the example. Thank you. Pete,
I mean, the other areas that AI, really, which is, in my opinion, advanced machine learning, right? Is the, AI is just fancier way to say advanced machine learning. But the other thing, so it's similar to what you're just talking about, Tim, is AI is very good at looking for anomalies in the data and those kinds of things. And we use an aspect of that to address in essence behavioral analytics. Like, is this an anomaly? Is this person taking this thing, or using it to verify device trust, right? So if we're taking an algorithm and running math on one device, a mobile device, and then separating that to a separate server, and then using AI to analyze that math equation every transaction to make sure that there hasn't been change greater than an allowable percentage, you can use the AI to then deliver a pretty high assurance level that that mobile device hasn't been tampered with, right? Doesn't have keystroke logging on it, or hasn't been jailbroken or rooted, or any of those things, or malware got on there. So there is ways to start using that advanced machine learning / AI to be offensive and defensive.
Yep. All right. We've got a question that's come in from the public, but before we get there, Josh, I just want to make sure that you got off your chest what you were the path you were going down a few moments ago.
Well, when you were saying AI against AI, obviously, one of the things that use cases is I was working for Deep Seas, big MDR provider. We managed 500,000 different desktops. Microsoft Defender was one of them, right? And what that customer wanted, they wanted to, that once the alerts correlate up into our portal, you log onto the portal to see the alerts. Well, they wanted us to disposition them and put them back in Defender, that it was a true positive, and close it out. And so we were writing back this true positive statement into Microsoft Defender and didn't know we actually broke the machine learning modules within Defender, because it was taking this activity, which was a true positive. The analytic did detect that as being what it was supposed to detect, but it was non-malicious. It was not a malicious activity. It was a known activity. So when we told the Defender that that's a false positive, don't worry about it, we never should have put the word false positive. What it did is it started taking that bad behavior and replicating it as good behavior inside. So if that would have happened around the network, it would have said, hey, that's fine. I'm not going to block that because you false positive that over here. And I've learned this bad activity that I should stop is actually good. So you can imagine where you poison your tool sets by having the wrong dispositions on things, and you fool them. They continue to go down the route of thinking that's not malicious, based on feedback it had before. So I'm concerned with machine learning that makes these automatic decisions that I can't trace back its logic. I can't say, all right, you made this decision because you did here and you went here. It's not a true if then else. And I think that's where I had a few AI guys that were on my podcast, and that's what they were saying was so missing. People don't trust the models because they can't walk it back. They don't see the cognition on how it got to that, where you and we could go into court and we get asked under oath, talk about how did I come up with this decision? What did I look at? And they can walk you back. They really can't do that with AI models very well. And so
AI can be set so that you have to show your work. And now that work might be based on bad data. I get that, but at least you've got some accountability.
Yeah. Well, then, and how do you change this decision-making process too? To what you need. So there's all these kind of questions like that. Having guardrails, like being able to produce malware within your model. I mean, there's usually a guardrail you want to put on that says it can't do generative AI that's malicious, and you don't want to allow it to do this, and you don't want to allow it to do that. So I can see in the future as it becomes integrated into business decisions. Imagine this. Imagine if you go to apply for a job and you have to talk to a bot first, and you never get to talk to a human. You just got to talk to this bot, and you have no idea how that went, and then that closed out. Now you're making decisions on humans based on some potential algorithm that somebody did. So you can see where to have trust, when we start moving AI and machine learning into these business systems, you have to have a serious discussion about the model and how to maintain the data, and what we will use it for to make decisions, what we will not use it for to make decisions.
That's a great point. Well, bots are already being employed for things like recruiting and making hiring decisions. So
which applies to insider threat. Like, is the bot the insider threat?
Yeah.
So totally. I went to a conference. There was an interesting thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
No, I'm just making it funny. Go ahead. What happens when the bot goes rogue? So,
AI agents, right? They talk about everyone having their own agent. Is that the property of the individual? Is that the property of the company? So you can see where this insider area is going to run into some kind of problem in the future. They leave the company. Do they get to take the agent with them? Probably not, even though that they've fully developed it. So there's going to be some tough decisions to make down the road.
Even more to what you're saying is, I saw the guy who blew up that Tesla at the Donald Trump place in Vegas. You know, the guy that blew the truck up, right? Part of all that information that came about for it was related to some false information that we saw propagated from an insider threat from a machine learning. There was machine algorithms that took that kind of story and morphed it and sent it out. It was really interesting when I saw how that. So I do see abuses of these AI models from that perspective. But in the Cybertruck one, the cops actually said they were getting the guy's chat GPT logs. That's the first time I ever heard that. I mean, I heard that they got his phone logs. I heard he got all this other time to actually have that subpoenaed, where they're subpoenaing your chat GPT logs. When is your AI agent going to testify against you? Imagine that. Imagine your AI agent that you've been using in business, and all of a sudden that's not your property. Like you were just saying, it's not your AI agent, it's someone else, and that can be interrogated. I don't know. It just seems a slippery slope now that Chat GPT logs are getting released by police officers. Does that
It's
make
a fascinating topic. I think we just spawned 2 more ReadySetCyber shows.
Yeah.
But coming back to the insider threat question, Farley has been in our chat, has been very patient to this point. I want to get to one of his first questions was, how can the current administration, and by that I think we're talking about the current federal government or maybe state governments or any government really, how can they enlist the private sector or defend themselves against insider threats? Is there something at the government level that can be done? And he even in the chat posits the idea of a data security czar. I'm curious to hear if you guys have thoughts on this.
I mean, I think they should stay out of it largely. I don't think there's been a major problem. Insider threat, like most organizations they get there's this problem, they're trying to solve it. You're seeing it play out. Like I said, I really studied trade secret litigation, and most of that has been pretty kind of, there hasn't been a lot of hangups there. Like, it's been pretty predictable. So the more the government can guarantee performance of your efforts, right? Like, I think they're just doing a very good job in those federal and state courts in terms of trade secret protection. Employee law, we saw, non-competes go away, things like that. So
Sure.
That's probably a much longer conversation that plays into insider threat as well. But overall, I think we're in a really good position right now. Like, if you do the right things, you can protect your proprietary data. People people that are going to sabotage your system or get back at you. I mean, that's just very difficult to defend. Josh and team. I'm listening to a lot of these podcasts of like you guys that are insider threat hunters. Like, it's a very difficult thing to pick out the bad people from the good people. So.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think the government needs to stay out of it for the most part. I think what they do well in would be stuff like NIST standards and putting together some standards that can be used by private industry, because we don't have a ton of research to go figure it out on our own. So would it be great for the government to do that? I think the government should concentrate on their own. There's from an insider threat, there's no bigger insider threat in the U.S. government right now with leaks of classified data and everything else that occurs. So I think they should focus on that. The federal infrastructure is so big and so sprawling, very hard to secure that. So I think there needs to be a concentration on that. So if the government's going to assist, 80% they need to concentrate on assisting the federal government in fixing the mess that's kind of there from an IT security perspective. And if you do want to help on the private sector, then stuff like the NIST guidelines and so forth that all of us can use as standards. I think one of the biggest ones not too many people talk about is I was in banks for a long time, and Ernst & Young and Wells Fargo, right? And they would send questionnaires over for third-party risk constantly, and it was always different. And there was this consolidated effort to put that into like one standardized third-party risk document that everybody can kind of agree on. All the banks would sign off on it. It would streamline everything. It would make sure we're speaking apples to apples, but you couldn't get all the banks to agree with it. So it was like the BITS Council standard. So I think if the government could help with things like that, where we can streamline that kind of communication, where just doing security for third parties as part of a risk management, there needs to be some standards we all have. Just like we all have a driver's license to drive on the road here, if we're really going to conduct enterprise level business, should we not have a cybersecurity license, so to speak?
So Josh, I got a question for you then. What's your opinion on, because this has been a massively emerging space, right? If we look at most professions, whether it's being a lawyer, an accountant, a realtor, there's a licensing process and a certification process for that. When we evaluate managed service providers or MSSPs, right now it's the wild, wild west, and there is no baseline standard certification to become an MSP. Now, I'm all for entrepreneurship. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 26 years old, need to do those things. I actually held a real estate license for a little while. I had to go take exams and get certified to be able to sell real estate, right? What's your opinions on the MSP space in its current form? And, those businesses, when they're really, for a lot of the SMB and the SME space, holding the keys to the kingdom for businesses in their IT department, functioning as a third party, right? They really become the supply chain risk for that business. What's your view on certification for MSPs and standardizing that? And what does the government need to step in there?
Yeah, I mean, really good question. Really, almost very difficult to do anything about. That's where the reputation of the company comes into play. Where you like SureFire, we have 65 people. We have a pretty good staff. They're digital forensics, they're incident response people. They have those industry certifications, so we use those as proof of our expertise. But however, any company can slap a logo on and say they're a cybersecurity company, and then these smaller companies have to rely, just like you said, on that person. And yeah, they have the keys of the kingdom and they walk out. I remember the city of San Francisco when the LAN admin locked the entire thing out and then quit. And the mayor had to go to the jail to ask him for the password to the city's network. So you can see where that kind of stuff is prevalent in the smaller business. The higher ones, like your Bank of America, Wells Fargo, they have GLBA, they have all kind of controls, all that kind of lower level stuff. You're not going to have that as much a risk. But yes, the SMB market relies on MSSP and that person's background, and they may have domain admin rights to 35 companies. And if that person goes rogue, the impact is pretty huge. Compared to just that one company, they now have IT access into about 30 or 40. So
yeah. All right, guys. Look, this is a fascinating topic. And like I said, we could go on. And I think there's a couple more shows that we're going to generate from this. But I do want to bring us back to, one or two final topics, and then we got to get out of the room here in about 9 minutes. So Josh, just following on something you were saying a minute ago. So when companies or local governments experience an insider threat security incident, what are some of the most common mistakes they make in responding?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say deleting and changing things, especially when it comes to logs or activities, and not taking retained. Like sometimes they'll say we're keeping 30 days worth of email, and it's continuing to delete messages as the investigation moves forward. So there's those kind of deletion you need to turn off, so you can preserve as much information from that perspective. So I think there's a couple different big mistakes that they make from that. Not bringing in the right people, using their own IT admins to try and figure stuff out, and they pollute the information and they just kind of step over everything. And then the employee's got a great point. Like, how do you know it's not the admin? He was just logging on my machine too and looking at things. So I think there's some mistakes of polluting the data that later does not give you the leverage or the information that you thought of. So I would just be careful on when it comes to data preservation. If you're really going to do an investigation from somebody from the inside, make sure it's coordinated through HR and that you hit the right repositories and you're able to grab the information. So I've just seen half-cocked internal investigations that kind of blow up. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. And actually, following on from that, Tim, I know this is something you've got something to say about, which is, what are some of the controls, the core controls you could deploy to protect against insider threats?
Yeah, absolutely. So continuing with Josh saying, I mean, that chain of custody, chain of title is really important. So having the right tools, the logging, I think that enforces that. But just off the bat, new employee, you want to have an IP kind of assignment acknowledgement, but that whatever I create at the company is not mine. I don't get to take it with me. That sounds obvious, but a lot of people it's not. And you clearly see people walking out the door. You see trade secret litigation in that. So just getting things right there. Employee onboarding, employee training. It shouldn't just be phishing training. It should be, hey, is that okay if I take this, right? Like just general reminders of what their responsibilities and duty are to the company. I think that helps a lot. Then I mentioned before, kind of deterrent controls like watermarking, pop-ups when they're sending things, right? Like these are all tools that the banks have, and the tools, that have been very, very effective. And then the logging, in case something does go wrong, as Josh has said, you really want to have your ducks in a row. You want to have you want to have very clear procedures on maintaining that data. So there's some left of boom there, there's some right of boom there, but you want to make sure you're doing the right things. Data classification, we didn't get into that. But you also, on these trade secret litigations, they also have to you have to label things and tag things. That's very helpful in a trade secret case. You took something, you knew you weren't allowed to take it, and you did it anyway. Right. And, the more you can kind of like reinforce that in controls and deterrence and pop-ups and employee training, they're going to be on the hook for it, right? Like so.
Right. Some of what you guys are talking about makes perfect sense. It's common sense. Heath, I just want to get one more question to you, and that is that related to these controls and these processes. One of the biggest problems companies face today when you're improving your security posture and following best practices like this is that you're kind of creating friction, right? And according to surveys, the number one reason employees push back or even managers push back is that some of this stuff is too difficult. It leads to poor adoption rates. Can we enhance security and not add friction?
It is possible, right? It's finding a balance. I think to going back to data classification, all those things, it takes a little bit of effort, right? That's company culture. And I think that creating the right company culture has to find that balance between understanding there's going to be a little bit of friction here and there, right? Like it goes back to, do you lock your house when you leave your house and you got to unlock it when you come home? That's friction, right? So, Matt Lee always talks about this or makes jokes everywhere he travels, but how many people just leave their computer screen open when they walk away from their desk, right? You just hit the freaking Windows L key and shut it down. So, but it means you got to sign back in when you come in, right? That's a little bit of friction, but can you make that sign in easier for them using, just facial rec or biometrics or whatever else so that they don't got to type something or do multiple processes? Yes,
Yep.
modern solutions like Traitware can deliver, frictionless login to those things, but it's a balance of company culture. You have to be able to lock stuff when you walk away from it. Lock your car, lock your house, whatever. Lock your computer when you walk away from it. Shut the application down. Don't leave the screen open, especially if you're in a public place like an airport or a coffee shop or whatever else it is. You got to do those things. And so, yeah, I think that there are technologies that are improving it to make it better, right? Most modern computers, your phone has got as simple as you pick it up, it knows you picked it up, it scans your face, and it's unlocked.
Yep.
And it should be that easy to access other things now also.
Yeah, and we're trending that direction. There's lots of tools. Every new version of the Apple devices I use has some way to remain secure and still speed up the process and just make it habitual. All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. I want to thank everyone for really what I think has been a great discussion. Panelists, appreciate your valuable time and insights. And the audience, we know that there's a lot of content out there for you to choose from, and we're happy that you joined us. Now, as a reminder, this show has been recorded and will be available on LinkedIn and YouTube, where you can hit the subscribe button and stay in the loop for upcoming shows. And also, as ever on social, liking and sharing is very much appreciated. If you have further questions, we're all on LinkedIn. We're happy to chat with you, so don't hesitate to reach out. Let's keep the conversation going. All right. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you on the next Ready, Set, Cyber.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.